The Portland stone cross of sacrifice commemorates the dead of World War I. There are 128 World War I graves here, both Commonwealth War Grave Commission and private memorials. The cross was designed by Sir Reginald Winfield, who also was the architect of the Menin Gate in Belgium. It reads, "To the honoured memory of those sailors and soldiers who gave their lives in the Great War 1914 to 1918 and who lie buried in this cemetery, their name liveth for evermore." The War Grave Commission's main aim initially was to mark graves with headstones in the overseas cemeteries. Therefore, in British cemeteries, some families erected their own headstones, but many were marked with just a wooden cross. After the war, the Commission replaced these with the standard headstone. Whilst those who were killed in action overseas would be buried there, many families wanted their sons to be remembered in Shrewsbury, and therefore their names would be recorded on family memorials. The headstones continued to be provided until 1921, when the registration of service graves by the Commission ceased, only to be revived after the outbreak of the Second World War. Circumstances of death were no bar to commemoration by the War Graves Commission, and the headstones provided dignity to those who died in institutions at a time when mental illness still carried a stigma. 6 First World War soldiers who died at the county asylum at Shelton are among those buried here. Equally, suicides and those who died from accidents and disease at home received headstones, as well as those who died a hero's death in battle. At least 15 of those victims of the Great War buried in the cemetery died in local hospitals from wounds received on the Western Front. Thousands of wounded servicemen were transported by train to Shrewsbury for treatment and convalescence at various institutions and locations. These included the old Royal Salop Infirmary, now the Parade Shopping Centre, One Quarry Place, Singfeld in Kingsland, Bashchurch Surgical Home and Wellington Cottage Hospital. Later, a war hospital was also established in the former Atcham Union Workhouse at Cross Houses. Henry George Price is the youngest casualty of the Great War buried in the cemetery. Known as Rennie, he enlisted in the Royal Navy and was a member of the crew of HMS Impregnable when he was taken sick and died at his family home, 5 Burton Street, Castle Fields, on the 29th of December 1914, at the age of 16. Sadly, it looks like someone has scratched off his age on the headstone. We hope to meet our pilot face to face when we have crossed the bar. The oldest World War I serviceman in the cemetery appears to be Private Joseph Peel of the Royal Defence Corps. Joseph died of bronchitis on the 15th of April 1917 at Knockalow Internment Camp, Patrick, on the Isle of Man, where he was stationed. His age according to the cemetery register was 67. Private Peel's home at the time was 3 Ladysmith Terrace, Mountfields, in Shrewsbury, though he had been born at War near Market Drayton, and he was a builder by trade. He had served part-time in the Shropshire Artillery Volunteers before joining the KSLI National Reserve. A son of his had also recently died of pneumonia while serving on the Western Front. Francis William Mason was born on the 6th of February 1863 in Bradmore, Upper Pen, Wolverhampton, to Francis and Sarah Mason, née Franklin. His parents married in 1862 in Wolverhampton, and by 1871 they had moved to Wellington and were living on Wrekin Course. Wrekin Course is situated along the road parallel to the long side of the Wrekin past the old rifle range. The only dwellings were in the vicinity of Wrekin Farm. Francis left home and enlisted in the Shropshire Light Infantry at Copthorne Barracks, Shrewsbury, on the 13th of April 1887. He spent the next 7 years serving in the 2nd Battalion KSLI in home stations. In 1894 the battalion was in Cork, Ireland, where he met his future wife, Kate O'Connor. They married there on the 3rd of February that year. While in Cork they started a family. A son, Francis, born 1895, and daughter, Mary, born 1898. In 1898 the family had returned to Shropshire, for early the following year the next edition of the family, Margaret, was born in the village of Aston, 3 miles southwest of Wellington. Francis continued his army service and from the 7th of March 1900 was serving in South Africa. The battalion had an eventful year chasing Boer contingents. They were commended on one occasion for marching 43 miles in 32 hours in an effort to cut off the enemy's line of escape. Francis was awarded the Queen's South Africa Medal with class for Johannesburg, Cape Colony and Orange Free State. The medal roll notes that he returned to England on the 20th December 1900. In 1901 he was working as a waggoner on a farm and living with his family in Aston. By 1911 the family had moved to 15 New Church Road in Wellington. There were 2 new additions to the family, William, born in 1904, and James, born in 1906. Francis William, now 47, was a domestic coachman, and his eldest son Francis, known as Frank, was a butcher. As an ex-soldier in 1914, he must have watched the streams of young men going off to war with mixed emotions. Despite his age, he felt that he should do his bit. He enlisted on the 23rd of October 1914 and was posted to the Royal Defence Corps, which was used to provide guards and sentries for prisoners of war camps and important establishments and camps. On 24th of November 1917, he was transferred to the Royal Flying Corps as a driver. Francis was stationed at Rollston Camp near Larkhill and Salisbury Plain. He was in the No. 1 Balloon School of Instruction, which taught the essentials of balloon usage in operational environments. This covered observers, artillery target acquisition, balloon control and communications. It also included how to abandon a balloon in the event of an enemy attack. The balloons were filled with hydrogen gas, so were highly flammable. On the 1st of April 1918, Francis was transferred to the newly formed Royal Air Force, but by this time he was seriously ill. He was sent to the Berrington War Hospital in Cross Houses. There he died on the 5th of April from pylorus carcinoma, vomiting and exhaustion. Pylorus carcinoma is more commonly referred to as cancer of the stomach. Kate, his widow, living then at 2 Regent Street, Wellington, was sent his war gratuity of £8 10 shillings in 1920. She paid for the inscription, "May he rest in peace," to be added to his headstone. Francis is remembered on the Wellington War Memorial. Reginald English Rumsey was born in 1890, and he would marry a Gladys Louise Gardner in 1915. Their life together was destined to be a very short one. He joined the 10th Service Battalion Welsh Regiment and served as a lieutenant before transferring to the RAF, in which he achieved the rank of captain. He died on the 9th of December 1918 at the Halser Hospital in Gosport, Hampshire, from burns and other injuries when his plane crashed. His obituary in the Royal Aeronautical Society magazine also states he carried out some brilliant observation work over the German lines. He was awarded the 1914 15 Star, British War and Victory medals. In his will, he left his wife £349, and he is remembered on war memorials at Mealbrace, St Chad's and Frankwell. Private Albert Lewis was born around 1883 and resided with his wife Mary at 27 New Park Street, Castle Fields. He enlisted at Shrewsbury on the 12th of December 1915 into the 3rd Battalion, King Shropshire Light Infantry. Albert was mobilised on the 15th of March 1917 and served on home service at Pembroke Dock until the 14th of November 1917, when he was discharged as medically unfit after being hospitalised at Pembroke Dock for several weeks. It seems that Albert was not at the best of health before enlisting, but his poor health was aggravated by the strains of military service, and Albert was hospitalised at the Royal Salop Infirmary on the 1st of May 1919. He died there on the 8th of May, aged 35. Nothing further is presently known of him, except that the War Memorial at Castle Fields incorrectly shows that he fell in 1918. Little is known about Robert Gamble until he enlists as a regular soldier aged 18 in March 1911. It appears that he was born about 1892, the son of Robert Gamble, who lived in the Clee Hill area, and that he no longer knew what had happened to his mother. At his enlistment, Robert gave his occupation as a labourer. Robert landed in France on the 11th of September 1914, and after receiving a bullet wound in his shoulder, was sent back to the UK on the 5th of January 1915. Robert entered Shorncliffe Hospital in Kent on the 8th of February, with his shoulder wound healing well, although his arm movement was impaired. However, the main problem now was his state of mental distress that caused him to have hallucinations of sight and hearing. This caused him to attempt suicide 3 days after he arrived, when he tried to jump into the sea. As a result, he was discharged from the army on the 28th of March 1915. By February 1916, Robert was incarcerated in an asylum where he died aged 24 on the 19th of May 1917. I'm not sure if it would have been Shelton who was incarcerated, but Robert is remembered on the Newbury War Memorial. John William Doveston was born the 21st of October 1893 in Atcham to Frances Henrietta Doveston, née Mailey, and her husband William Daniel Doveston, the eldest of 4 children. His father's profession was a solicitor. John attended Wellington College and also Oswestry Grammar School for a short time. He joined the 7th Battalion King Shropshire Light Infantry in the second half of 1915 and was sent over to France, arriving on the 28th of September 1916. It is believed John was injured during combat and was repatriated to England, where he eventually ended up as a patient in the Berrington War Hospital near Shrewsbury. The hospital was built in 1793, originally as the Atcham Union Workhouse. In 1916 it was acquisitioned by the military and became the Berrington War Hospital, named after the nearby location of Berrington train station, before becoming successfully a general hospital, maternity hospital, and finally a geriatric hospital after the war. Most people will know it as Cross Houses Hospital. The building was eventually closed in 2000, and after a period of lying empty, the site was redeveloped into modern housing, with the original main building being retained. On Wednesday the 2nd of May 1917, Private John William Doveston died of tuberculosis at the age of 23. John is commemorated on the War Memorial in the village of West Felton near Oswestry. Arthur Reginald Harry Davis was born in the district of St Chad's in Shrewsbury on the 12th of March 1890 to Alice Davis, née Smith, and her husband John Davis, who was a grocer. After his education at Wellington College, Reg, as he was known, completed a 5-year apprentice in 1909 at the Shrewsbury Electric Works. On the 7th of September 1914, he enlisted in the 6th Battalion, King Shropshire Light Infantry, and it was not long before he was promoted to Lance Corporal. In March 1915 he was made up to Acting Corporal, with promotion to the rank confirmed on the 22nd of July. On the 25th September 1915, the opening shots of the Battle of Loos rang out across the battlefield. 6 divisions were involved in what was referred to at the time as the Big Push. An hour or so later the 6th Battalion entered the fray, shortly after which Corporal Reg Davis received a gunshot wound to his left shoulder. His spine was fractured and 9 pieces of shrapnel became lodged in his mid-torso. When he regained consciousness, he was told by doctors that he would require treatment for the rest of his life. Reg was repatriated back to England on the 5th of October and arrived the following day. He was admitted to the infirmary at Stoke-on-Trent for treatment. At a medical board on the 23rd of January 1916, the conclusion was that Reg suffered from complete paralysis and loss of sensation below the navel, complete severance of spinal cord by a piece of shrapnel, and permanent total incapacity. In the terminology of today, he would be regarded as paraplegic. On the 29th of June, he was granted a formal medical discharge in Shrewsbury, thereby qualifying him for a Silver War badge, and soon afterwards returned to the care of his family. On Monday the 16th of July 1917, Corporal Arthur Reginald Harry Davis, passed away at his family home in Shrewsbury. He was aged just 27 years old. Lance Corporal Alfred Victor Winfield resided with his parents Joseph and Florence Beatrice Winfield at Hen and Chickens Public House, 37 Longden Column in Shrewsbury, and was by occupation employed with the Ordnance Survey. He joined the Royal Engineers aged 16 years and 5 months at Shrewsbury on the 8th of June 1908. He was posted to the Training Battalion Royal Engineers as Boy, and then promoted to Lance Corporal Boy on the 23rd of June 1810. On the 8th of January 1911 he had attained the age of 18 years and was posted to the ranks as Sapper. On the 4th of April 1912 he was with the 1st Printing Company, No. 2 Section Royal Engineers, and promoted to Lance Corporal on the 16th of August 1916, and then Corporal on the 9th of September 1916, serving with the 126th Field Company Royal Engineers. He served in France from the 12th of August 1914 to the 18th of December 1916, and he was admitted into Graylingwell War Hospital in Chichester on the 13th of December 1916, suffering from chronic trench nephritis, which is a kidney infection. He was on a medical board at the hospital 5th of April 1917 and was discharged from the hospital 10th of April 1917, and then discharged from the army on the 26th of April, as being no longer physically fit for war service under King's regulations. He died at the 27th of January 1919, aged 26. Also commemorated on this headstone are his brothers, Company Quartermaster Sergeant Ernest Winfield of the 34th Company Machine Gun Corps, killed in action the 19th of April 1918, aged 27, and he is commemorated on the Tyncott Memorial in Belgium. And also Bugler Leslie Frederick Winfield of the 1st and 4th King Shropshire Light Infantry. He died in France on the 19th of November 1918, aged 19, and he is buried at St Stephen Cemetery Extension, Rouen in France. Captain Joshua Bower Hughes Games died the 17th of October 1918, suddenly from pneumonia at Quarry Nursing Institute in Shrewsbury. He was the eldest son of the late Reverend J. W. Hughes Games and Mrs. Hughes Games of 64 Pembroke Road, Bristol. He was born in 1888 and educated at Shrewsbury, and then entered Queen's College, Cambridge in 1907 as a scholar, proceeding to his degree in 1910, and was a master at Forest School at the outbreak of war. He was discharged on the 5th of July 1918 after 20 months in hospital, having been wounded in France on the 1st of October 1916. He returned to Shrewsbury School as a temporary master after being discharged from hospital. Corporal Arthur Rice Birch of the 6th Reserve Battalion Canadian Infantry was born the 13th of July 1889 to Thomas and Martha Birch of 25 Bishop Street, Cherry Orchard, Shrewsbury, and by occupation was a bank clerk. He enlisted on the 24th of September 1914 at Valcartier, Quebec. I couldn't find any information as to why he was in Canada, but sadly he died the 1st of January 1915, aged 25, of diabetes at his father's home in Shrewsbury. Private William Gordon Tyrrell lived in Toronto, Canada, and served in the Toronto Light Infantry Battalion. He died aged 22 on the 14th of May 1917. He had received a gunshot wound to his left hip and abdomen at Vimy Ridge in France on the 11th of April. He was brought to Barrington War Hospital, where he died from his injuries. Camille Verschick. Camille was Flemish and a soldat, equivalent to a private in the 3rd Regiment of Jagers de Voigt, the equivalent of an English light infantry regiment. Camille hanged himself in his cell at Shrewsbury Prison on the 5th of May 1916, aged 26. He had been on remand awaiting trial on a charge of stabbing an English civilian with a knife with intent to commit grievous bodily harm at Croxton in Staffordshire, and at his own request worked alone in his cell, making mailbags. He hanged himself with a cord used in his work. At the inquest, the foreman commented that Verschick may have been under the impression that he would hang for his offence in England. He was born at Steenkirk and lived near Brussels until August 1914, when the Germans invaded Belgium, and he was sent with his regiment to the frontier. His grave has a standard Belgian military headstone, which incorporates the Belgian tricolour and a black cross. The inscription is in Flemish on a cast iron plaque and depicts his medals. In October 1939, shortly after the outbreak of the Second World War, Shrewsbury Cemetery was extended on its west side, with the extension divided into 20 consecrated plots. In 1940, a large portion of Plot 10 was set aside for the graves of the British Commonwealth servicemen and women who died during the course of the war and up to 1947. We have 4 headstones here, and their bodies are still actually buried in the churchyards that it states. So this one says Holy Trinity in Buildwas, but sadly it seems that their graves have been lost in those graveyards, so now they have headstones here commemorating them. So we have V.J. Griffiths, who's buried at Holy Trinity at Buildwas, C. Sherwood at St. Luke's Churchyard in Dorley, another one at Dorley, Private W.H. Jones, and St. Michael's at Lilleshall, H. Matthews. Private William J Cotter is the youngest of the Second World War burials in the cemetery. He served in the Royal Army Service Corps and was killed in a flying bomb raid in London on the 28th of July 1944. He was aged 18. His body was brought to Shrewsbury as his father was a non-commissioned officer in the KSLI, living at the time at Copthorne Barracks. Private Charles Burchett is the oldest serviceman buried in the cemetery. He served in the Pioneer Corps, a unit raised in October 1939 primarily from ex-soldiers still able to wield a pick and shovel. He died at Copthorne Military Hospital, part of what is now the Royal Shrewsbury Hospital, on the 27th February 1946, aged 68. A man of this age could well have previously served in the Boer War, let alone the 1914-18 war. No details of his military career appear to have survived, but he was born in North London and enlisted when living in Surrey. Warrant Officer Edward Kriebert was born in Scotland but moved with his family to Shrewsbury, where they lived in Mousecroft Lane. He was educated at the Priory Boys' School and then Harold's College in London. Kriebert joined the RAF on the outbreak of war in 1939 and was variously stationed in Northern Ireland and South Africa as a navigation instructor before returning to Britain. On the 15th of February 1944, Edward was leading a training flight in his Whitley Mark V bomber, which was towing a glider. They flew over the Stiperstones hills towards the south when they were disturbed by a gust of wind. The glider cast off and landed safely in nearby Hope Valley, but the bomber's wingtip caught the steep hillside and it crashed into Mitten Dingle, disintegrating upon impact and leaving a wreckage over a wide area. Local people rushed to the site but to no avail, and all 5 crew members had died before help arrived. Edward Kriebert was aged 24. Sergeant Alan John Francis was killed on or about the 17th of May 1943 when the Sterling Mark I that he was gunner in suffered a double engine failure whilst on a training flight over Stoke-on-Trent. On instructions from the pilot, Leslie Charles Wright, the entire crew bailed out. Sergeant Wright bravely stayed at the controls of the aircraft and in doing so prevented the aircraft from crashing into Stoke-on-Trent. All of the crew landed safely apart from Alan, who was found 4 days later in a field, one assumes a victim of a parachute failure. Sergeant Alan Francis was 19 years old. Major William Frank Hayland attained a number of distinctions at Wellington College, a prefect, member of the Rugby 15s and head of gym. He passed on to Sandhurst where he won the Sword of Honour. In the army, again his strong character was at war with his physical infirmities. He had to leave the Indian Army because of a weak heart, but won his commission in the 60th Rifles in the 1914-18 war. He fought in France, Salonika and Mesopotamia, was twice wounded and mentioned in dispatches. Hayland retired when war was over, but came back in 1939 and went over to France with the Pioneer Corps in 1940 and escaped hazardously from Saint-Nazaire, where he was once again mentioned in dispatches. He was killed instantaneously when his bicycle collided with a bus in a blackout at Shrewsbury on December the 5th, 1942. He was aged 53. Sgt Robert DouglasDriscoll had taken off in a Lancaster bomber at 16:33 hours from RAF Spilsby in Lincolnshire to bomb the Rihania Osag oil refinery in Germany that the United States Allied Air Forces had previously attacked in daylight operations, but was still operating. 237 Lancasters with 8 Mosquitoes bombing the area, with reports that the residential and some industrial areas were hit, but the reports did no mention of the actual factory. Sergeant Driscoll's Lancaster had returned safely from the operation when at 21:31 hours they collided with another Lancaster 3 from 207 Squadron whilst doing circuits ready to land at Scrumby Airfield in Lincolnshire. All 14 crew from both aircraft lost their lives. Sergeant Robert DouglasDriscoll was just 20 years old. On the 13th of November 1943, Flight Sergeant Lawrence Cullen took off from RAF Wittering in Northamptonshire for a day practice flight and camera exercise. During a training attack on Stirling in Scotland, the plane, a de Havilland DH-98 Mosquito NF Mark II, broke up in air over Polebrook in Northamptonshire. It hit the ground and exploded. On board were Flight Lieutenant John Desmond Bridge, the pilot, and Flight Sergeant Lawrence James Francis Cullen, navigator. Lawrence Cullen was 24 years of age. Flying Officer Ronald Samuel Mann Lees was studying science at Cambridge University before the war, following in his father's footsteps, who had been a lecturer in thermodynamics and Fellow of St John's College, Cambridge. When war was declared, fellow students studying the arts had to relinquish their studies. However, Ronald, studying science, was allowed to complete his degree. After being awarded his degree, Ronald joined the Royal Air Force. He started work on top-secret radar development at the Telecommunications Research Establishment, then at Wortham Travers in Dorset. In March 1942, he is recorded as working in Group 25, entitled Post-Development Services, alongside, amongst others, Martin Ryle, who later received a Nobel Prize and became Astronomer Royal. The Post-Design Services Group helped to introduce new radar equipments into service use, particularly new equipments fitted in aircraft. Typically, a small number of handmade models were installed and used operationally to get quick results. The staff of Post-Design Services would go to RAF aerodromes to set up and adjust the equipment before operational sorties. They would then get reports on how the equipment operated in practice. These reports were used to determine whether changes in design were needed before starting to produce the equipment in quantity. In May 1942, Ronald moved with the establishment to Malvern when it was relocated to reduce the risk of German attack after the British raid on a German radar station at Brunval in France. In November 1943, he was transferred to London HQ in Church House, Westminster. Ronald met Annette Hughes on a train from London to Cambridge in 1939. Annette was being evacuated from London, where she was studying at the London School of Economics. Ronald craftily took a note of the address on Annette's case and later contacted her in Cambridge. They were married at Birmingham in 1942 when Ronald was working at TRE in Malvern. Annette moved to Malvern and worked part-time for a while at the Army HQ for radar. Soon after the D-Day landings, Ronald contracted a serious flu. All the available hospitals on the south coast were cleared for the reception of casualties from France. By this time, Annette had moved back to be with her family in Shrewsbury, and Ronald was therefore sent to Shrewsbury by train from London to convalesce. He briefly stayed with Annette and her family, but the medical officer from the Shrewsbury barracks then sent him to Shrewsbury Royal Infirmary. The limited supplies of penicillin, which was fairly new at the time, were also concentrated in the war zone and therefore not available in Shrewsbury. Ronald died on the 8th of August 1944 of acute bronchial pneumonia and cardiac failure, aged 24. Able seaman Raymond Gordon Brown was the son of Ellen Maud Brown and Thomas Henry Brown, and stepson of John F. Morris of Monkmore, Shrewsbury. He was born the 9th of May 1924 at Birmingham and died the 24th of April 1944, aged 19. Raymond was part of the crew of His Majesty's motor torpedo boat 671 of the Fairmile D-class, which was sunk by gunfire from German destroyers off Cape Barfleur, France, on 24th of April 1944. An eyewitness account tells us that the 55th Motor Torpedo Boat Flotilla was working from HMS Dolphin in Gosport at the time. 3 D-class boats sailed from that base at around 3 p.m. on the 24th, doing their usual patrol in the area of the imminent invasion of Europe. Motor Torpedo Boat 671 was just off Alderney at about 10 p.m. when there was a sound of rushing water and of churning screws, and the high white bow waves of 3 German destroyers travelling at speed straight for the boat. Both boats were unaware of each other's presence until the very moment the bow waves of the destroyers died down. As they reduced speed and at 30 yards range, all hell broke loose. No living man could describe what started to come their way. It was just a blazing hell. The Allied boats turned to starboard, the opposite way to the enemy, with all guns blazing, each in turn receiving heavy damage, casualties and loss of life. Motor Torpedo Boat 671 perished in the onslaught with the loss of its entire crew. Sister Marion Isabel Tong was serving in the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service. She died at Shenley Military Hospital in Hertfordshire in October 1942, aged 32. She was a native of Shropshire, however, and it was from her home county that she had enlisted. The QAIMNS was formed in 1902, and its nurses served principally on hospital ships and in military hospitals. Constance Mary Barnacut was a volunteer with the Auxiliary Territorial Service. She died on the 27th of December 1940, aged 40, at Salop Mental Hospital. Her last known address was 20 Vernon Road, Bushey in Hertfordshire. She was born on the 2nd of September 1899 and was the daughter of Richard Ashford and Lucy Gertrude Barnacut. Aircraftsman First Class John Richard Leslie Edwards was an excellent swimmer, and in 1937 was presented with the Royal Humane Society's certificate on vellum for saving the life of a young girl called Sylvia Parry from the River Severn near the weir. He was also a regular attender at All Saints Church in Castle Fields, where he lived with his parents, and was a member of the choir for many years. He joined the RAF on the day war was declared and was described as an enthusiastic member with excellent prospects of promotion. Sadly, these ambitions were not to be realised, as he was killed in a flying accident at the RAF station at Sutton Bridge in Norfolk on the 13th of October 1940. He was aged 21. Sergeant Edgar Fulton was a prefect at Tilapia Park Intermediate High School in Australia and a pianist who played in local bands. For many years his parents ran a grocery store in the Kingston shopping centre. He enlisted in December 1940 and trained in Canada in November 1941 before transferring to England in early 1942. He flew on Wellington and Lancaster bombers, and he died when his Lancaster bomber struck a tree near the landing ground while returning from a night operation. The Lancaster took off from RAF Brayton near Selby on a cross-country training flight, including bombing practice, on the night of 2nd of March 1943. The aircraft encountered bad weather, and at 12 minutes past midnight on the 3rd of March crashed 1 mile west of Shrewsbury, Shropshire. All the crew members were killed. Also on board were Sergeant Ross Clive Graham, Sergeant Thomas Patrick Millady, and Flight Sergeant Edward Francis Murphy. Sergeant Edgar Claude Fulton was 23 years old. Felix Novak was a lieutenant of the Polish Air Force. He died on the 9th of November 1944, aged 28. After service with the Polish Army from 1937 to 1938, he worked in the cotton trade until Germany invaded Poland, when he saw much fighting with the 59th Infantry Regiment. Escaping from Poland via Hungary and Yugoslavia to France, he once again joined the Polish forces under French control. At some point during this period, it appears he became a prisoner of war, but little is known of his life until he made his way to England via Spain and Portugal and joined the Polish aircrew training at Hucknall, Derbyshire in July 1942. On the 1st of September 1943 he was commissioned as a pilot officer and was posted to 60 Operational Training Unit at High Arkle in October of the following year. On the 9th of November 1944 at around 1 a.m, the Mosquito he was flying in veered into a sharp turn and went into a spiral dive before crashing and exploding on impact at Horman Farm near Shrewsbury. Wreckage was spread over a wide area, with burning debris landing on the front yard of the farm. The circumstances of the crash point to engine failure at low speed, something which is almost impossible for any pilot to handle, even an experienced one such as Novak, who had over 500 flying hours behind him. Flying Officer Novak was a Roman Catholic, which explains his burial in Shrewsbury Cemetery rather than High Arkle Churchyard. Sapper Frederick Wilkins was the last serviceman to be buried in the cemetery. Wilkins of the Royal Engineers was a Nottingham man, and he died on the 28th of July 1945. He passed away at Copthorne Military Hospital, and he was aged 35. Also in this plot are the graves of 23 Italians and 27 German servicemen, as well as 2 Poles. The Italians and Germans had been captured by the Allies and died as prisoners of war in captivity in and around Shrewsbury. The nearest camp was at Shelton Road, but other camps were at Donnington, Ludlow, Wem and Condover. Each German headstone has an inscribed Mantua cross as a symbol of nationality, and the headstone acknowledges that they died as servicemen of their country. Erwin Kock was a German prisoner of war and aged 23 when he was accidentally killed on the 3rd of January 1947 at Shelton Road Camp. He was helping guide an RAF lorry into a garage for repairs when he was crushed between the vehicle and a swing door. Johann Rotten, known as Hans, died almost instantly at the scene of an accident on the main Madeley to Bridge North Road near the village of Sutton Maddock on the 13th of December 1946. He was a passenger in a lorry taking a group of Germans to work on farms when it collided side-on with an RAF lorry on the icy road. Two of the Italian prisoner of wars buried in the cemetery were briefly in the local headlines, though for very different reasons. Caporale Maggiore Silvio Garafallo sadly drowned whilst bathing in the River Severn at Shelton Roughs on the 29th of May 1944. He was known to be a strong swimmer, and it was believed he fainted in the water when attempting to get back to the shore. The cemetery register gives his abode as Sheriff Hale's prisoner of war camp near Newport. His death occurred while he was on liberty leave from the camp on Shelton Road in Shrewsbury. Soldato Leopoldo Santapia died 3 days after Silvio. He was fatally stabbed with a work knife in a brawl with a fellow prisoner of war in the cobbler's workshop at Sheriff Hale's camp. His assailant was later convicted of manslaughter. Soldato Gagliadi was the last prisoner of war to be buried in the cemetery. He was a private in the Italian army, and the year of birth on his headstone suggests that he was aged 28 or 29. However, the cemetery register records his age as 24, suggesting that he may have volunteered giving a false age. He died in Copthorne Hospital on the 23rd of March 1945, and German troops in Italy surrendered just a few weeks later on the 2nd of May.